Good afternoon, good day, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome. So I'm Joseph Lam of the Music School and Musicology. So I have the honor of introducing today's lecture. So first, I have to say that this is our sixth presentation in the noon lecture series of the Lieberthal-Rogel Center for Chinese Studies for the winter of 2024. There are flyers for the complete series schedule somewhere out there. And also the schedule is available on the China Center website, so you can check the email and for addresses. So now I have three announcements to make. Please know that there will not be any lecture presentations next week, Tuesday, February 27, because we are having a winter break. The next presentation in the series will take place on Tuesday, March the 5th. And will be given by Professor Brooke Siperin, Miseria Eli, Professor of Chinese Religion, Philosophy, and Comparative Thought at the Divinity School of the University of Chicago. He will be speaking on a very interesting title, which is called Repurposed Mythology versus Repurposed Divination, the Zhou Yi and the Development of Chinese Philosophy. So please come. And then on Saturday, this coming Saturday, February the 24th, the UN Planetarium and Dome Theater in the UN Museum of Natural History will host four showings of a Lunar New Year presentation. So flyers are available somewhere here. And tickets are $8 each and available until Saturday from the Natural Museum gift shop. So that promises to be a very interesting event too. Now let me introduce our today's speaker. He is Professor Minghui Hu. This list, he has just learned that he's been promoted full professor at the University of California, Santa Cruz. So congratulations to Minghui. And I got acquainted with Professor Hu not that long ago, but since then we have become very new and old friends. So he comes with a very interesting history. He began his undergraduate studies as a structural engineering with computer-assisted analysis and design in Taiwan, and earned his BS in 1889. Then he moved to America and got his MS from Virginia Tech Science and Technology Studies graduate program. After that, he moved to Los Angeles to pursue his PhD in history at UCLA. I think that's a good move, but why from science to history in that drastic, that I don't know, I have to find out later on. But again, he's not your regular graduate student, because while he was studying the PhD, he was also working as a computer programming in a child psychiatrist lab at UCLA Hospital. I don't know how anyone can manage that. But anyway, he did that and finished his dissertation in the History of Science program in UCLA in 2004. And after that, he got a Andrew Mellon postdoctoral fellowship at the University of Chicago. And after that, he joined the Faculty of History at the University of California, Santa Cruz in 2005. And there he has been having a wonderful career. He has published a monograph titled China's Transition to Modernity, The New Classical Vision of Dai Zhen. It's 2005 from University Press of Washington. The book has been well received, and a Chinese translation is coming up. And then the 2016, he added a volume called Cosmopolitanism in China, 1600 to 1950, with Johann Elverskork, I suppose that's. So, and he has published many articles in academic journals such as the International History Review, Frontier of History in China, 21st Century, Shehang, and the Harvard Journal of Asiatic Studies. And he has completed a new book manuscript, should be coming up next year. The title is Waiting for the Barbarians, A History of Geopolitical a history of geopolitics in early modern China. And throughout his career and publication history, data mining and the field of digital humanities are the main focus of his research and future research. And of course, he will be continuing to study the history of early modern China. Today, he will be talking on a very fascinating topic. The title is Between Food and Medicine, a preliminary exploration of the consumption of ginseng, bird's nest, and sea cucumber and shark fin in the early modern China. Just reading the title makes me my mouth watery and feel energetic with all this good food. And I must say that I think I have something to do with him pushing him to Minghui's new line of research in food and medicine, because I'm interested in food and music. So if you are into food and something else, tell us. We may be developing a research team on this pleasurable and fun topic. So without further ado, Minghui.
Thank you. Thank you, Joseph, for your very generous and detailed introductions. And I also like to say, given all my background in computers, I recently started a research cluster at UCSC. It's called Humanities in the Age of Artificial Intelligence, and we're trying to catch on the wagon of all this AI stuff. And we have very interesting people from Silicon Valley and all kinds of places to explore the use of AI in humanities. And I myself is developing an AI translation engine, which is specifically designed for academic purpose. So can I have the book title if you have it already? The book cover, the email that I sent you? As Joseph said, I just finished a book. And I just got this book cover design a few days ago, and I like it. So the title is Waiting for the Barbarians. It's really about the idea, the central political idea in Chinese history from all the ancient time to the modern world. The idea, the distinction between the Chinese and barbarians. And it is such a central idea in China, and I don't know why nobody in Anglophone scholarship never touch this topic systematically. So the book should come out for the next AAS, and I look forward to discussing this book in Columbus as well. So can I come back to my slides? Okay. So today I'm trying to go through this new project I was formulating. I just went to a conference in January in Iloilo in the Philippines. I had that conference with a bunch of archaeologists and Southeast Asian specialists. And I really had this idea to think about ocean-centered and different kind of environmental history of the East Asia in general. And so this is part of it. This idea to talk about the luxury food is part of it. So let me start. Should I just, there's no keyboard here. Oh, use this? Oh, okay. Okay, that will be best. Okay. All right, so my central inquiry is very simple. Why was certain food traded and consumed as exotic luxuries? How did they emerge as such luxuries in the early modern world? So the hint is, of course, I'm not just talking about China. But in China, we want to talk about 4 luxury foods. First is ginseng. You've probably seen this before, but you don't eat it raw. You actually process it. So on this side is Korean red ginseng. The other side is Wisconsin ginseng, which is enormously popular in China. Here is the bird's nest. It's fundamental. It's saliva of the swallow. And the ingredients mostly protein, basically, nothing really special. And then this is bird's nest soup you made. Next one's sea cucumbers. You get it, for nowadays, you harvest most of the sea cucumbers from the coral zone. So it's actually, the harvest of sea cucumbers damage the coral zone very significantly. And this is, I think, red-based sea cucumbers you eat in China very often during the festivals. Here's shark fins. You catch a shark and you cut off the man on top and the fins at bottom and the tails, and you dry it and you make it into shark fin soups. So, all of them, from 16 all the way to 18th century, they were harvested, not grown, which means you have to go to a specific location to harvest this full exotic food. And the cost, of course, is very high, and their availability was uncertain. So, granting the fact that you need to get an enormous amount of initial capital investment, get a boat, and a lot of them were outside of China, get a boat to get them, to harvest them, the cost they accumulated in original capital and later the network you can trade this stuff was quite significant. Okay, so where did they come from? The ginseng came from the border between the Manchuria and the Korean Peninsula. The sea cucumber came from outside of the Dalian port, which it was called Liaodong back in the early modern world. And this two-part in the 17th and 18th centuries were not part of China. And the Manchu Qing dynasty actually sealed off the most of Manchuria from Chinese migration. And therefore, the environmental was well preserved and the population density was very low. Therefore, that means only the banner armies had a special monopoly of harvesting ginseng and, to some degree, the sea cucumber as well. So the shark fins comes from the South China Sea today. South China Sea, many of you probably don't know, has about 2,000 species of sharks. And so that's a natural hunting ground for people to get shark fins, right? And the most exotic one, you have to come all the way to Borneo Island, all right? And in southern part of Borneo Island, and that's where you can find all the swallow nest on the cliff, and then you harvest them, and then sell it back to China. All right. What healing powers? So, these four things obviously have known in China for a while because they were harvested fairly early on. The thing is, according to the medical texts in China, they all have some sort of healing powers. Okay, so the Ben Cao Gang Mu is the text, right? Compendium of Materia Medica. It's a very well-known Chinese medical text. And what you probably don't know is that it created a tradition. The Ben Cao Gang Mu was published in the 16th century, and very quickly, it became very useful to almost all scholars in China. And for the 17th, 18th centuries, they create all kinds of texts. Ben Cao, Xu Gang Mu, blah, blah, blah. There's all kinds of names, all follow the same format, adding all the information to Ben Cao Gang Mu. So it has formed a tradition. So the following information I will present to you, taken from the tradition, not just Ben Cao Gang Mu. Okay, so here the first one is ginseng. I translated the Ben Cao Gang Mu text. It's sweet, it's slightly cold, it's non-toxic, it's used to treat symptoms of insufficiency and yang exhaustion. Basically, and also this ginseng was used by a French missionaries, and he published his work in Paris and quickly translated into English, German, and other languages. and became so ginseng was very well known in the West ever since the beginning of the 18th century. And this is exactly what he said in his publication. It's about ginseng could cure dizziness, spontaneous sweating, phlegm sound. The phlegm sound is the mucus sound you make from your throat. And when you pause, it's too strong. And of course, you have all kinds of descriptions like spleen, stomach qi deficiency, lack of appetite for food and drinks, cold stomach qi, fullness. Okay, so all this sounds very vague to me, actually. And I never believed that. But my mom used to make me eat some ginseng when I was young, and she's still eating it, and I have to get some Wisconsin ginseng for her every year. So bird's nest. Bird's nest enters the lungs to generate qi. All this is from Bencao traditions, right? Nourish water in the kidneys, strengthen the stomach, and supplement the spleen, nourishing without causing dryness. Sounds pretty good. And well, modern medical tests shows it's just protein, and the protein is probably less than 1 egg. Here is a sea cucumber. It's another thing. Well, sea cucumber and shark fin soup today brought China very bad names, right? Because they devastated the entire sea ecology along the China coast. But sea cucumber, I had it many times. It really tastes good. No? You cook it well. It's really a Chinese delicacy. Sweet and salty, without a warm nature, it nourishes spleen, kidney, and lung meridians. And you can see these terms, medical terms about body and how they would work with your bodies. It's shark fin soup. So shark, they know the main coming back and the fins underneath. It tastes rich and delicious, and it's treasured by people in the South. That's from the Bencao, right? So you can see shark fin soups, and nowadays it all came into Hong Kong and through China, and Hong Kong consume like 50% of shark fin soup in China. So very early on, people know this is for Southerners. Southerners really love this. But now it has become a nationwide Chinese delicacy. Mostly in the weddings, you serve shark fin soup. Okay, that has become such a convention. Most people had their first shark fin soup in the weddings. Okay, so the 4 very exotic food and with the healing power. So we don't know exactly what ginseng usually can be sold in the medical shop, right? But others usually sold as food, but they also have healing power. So we probably can say they are somewhere situated between food and medicine. Why and what were their roles in the global trade of luxury goods, right? So they were very expensive in the early modern world. Bird's nest, for example, showed up in Hong Lou Meng, which is a very important novel in the 18th century. Your different branches of very big household, only the richest branch could have the bird's nest soup. And the poor branch cannot have it, so it created all this family politics because of a bird's nest soup. So, and it is still very expensive today. A box of ginseng will cost about $200, and the bird's nest soup is higher than that. It's still expensive today, and the healing power is still widely believed in China today. So there was no doubt it was some sort of luxury goods. So what were their roles in global trade then? Okay, now let's take a look. This is the silver trade in other commodities from 17th century all the way to 18th century, and you can see most of the global trade is about the transatlantic trade has a lot to do with the metal and the industrial materials they are using. But when they come to East Asia and Southeast Asia, it is about pepper, spicy, silk, and stuff like that, right? And what's really important is this global spice trade. So you can get nutmeg and mace from this part of the world, cinnamon from Ceylon, black pepper from southern and cloves from here, and ginger from southern China, silk from China, and long pepper from there, and saffron from that part of Europe. So the Mediterranean world. The thing is, all of them occupy almost exactly like the Chinese luxury food, right? A barrel of nutmeg, when they shipped around the world, reach Netherlands, costs almost like equivalent a barrel of the gold. That's how expensive it was. And all of them were traded globally from 17th to 18th century. So you may say, well, that's just European-driven global trade. What about Asian trade? Here, Asian trade, usually, this is from most of the scholars who study Japan and Korea. You can see there's such different kind of samurai domains would trade the stuff. The most interesting part, of course, is the Satsuma domain. They subjugated Ryukyus, and Ryukyus was a tributary state for China, and therefore, Ryukyu served both sides. From the 17th century onward, Edo, the Tokugawa, and the Beijing, the Qing China, they do not recognize each other. They didn't like each other, and therefore they did not have any kind of official trade with each other, right? But because of the Japan's trade in different domains, Matsumae to the north and Tsushima domain trading between the Seoul and the submission there to Edo. So the entire trade network with Japan actually connected with Chinese trade. Okay, so through Ryukyus, through Tsushima and Seoul, and through the north with the global fur trade. So with this, where are the ginseng, bird's nest, shark fins? Where are they? They are not part of this. They were not part of the global trade that we used to know. The map I show you, I took it from a war history textbook. Okay, it was very commonly known, and the global spice trade has enormous amount of literature. It's well known, and this Asian studies literature about trade is also well known. Look, the nutmeg, and I am picking 4 things, just like the 4 Chinese luxury goods I got, right? So I just make this equivalent comparison for you. Nutmeg, this is what nutmegs look like. Cloves, I use it all the time. It's from Southeast Asia. This is what cloves looks like. Cinnamon is from Ceylon. Cinnamon stick, pepper. We cannot cook anything without pepper, right? So pepper is here. And they also have healing powers. They will also believe all 4 spices were considered internal warming herb, right? Throughout most of, so in Europe, they did not just use that to flavor food. They believe this kind of luxury, exotic luxuries, also are good for you. And sometimes you can eat them, have them, put them in a soup to heal your symptoms, such as intestinal distress, impotence, diarrhea, vomiting, and chloria. So this is the traditional literature. I just got it from a book. It tells you how important. This is no longer Eurocentric histories. We are now doing a global history or world history. But what's missing in all the literature before is nobody touches what China wanted. Everything is what Europe wanted, right? The silk, the porcelain, tea, spices, cinnamon, everything is consumed by European. Basically, the entire global trade is about what Europe wanted. What did China want? And all luxuries, none of them existed in the current literature. You may think, oh, that's because Chinese eat disgusting stuff, right? That's exactly what they say in the 19th century, all the missionary reports. They demonize with these strong racist tones about what Chinese people eat. And therefore, nobody touches the issue. for such a long time, what China wanted was not part of a scholarly literature. There are many, many other contemporary reasons too, because environmental concern, people think, China should not eat shark fins. We're going to stop that for Chinese. Just like we're going to stop Japanese from eating dolphins. Never worked. So, and the sea cucumbers, and same stories. But maybe they were just some exotic food, not very popular in China. Therefore, it did not generate that kind of a global trade. But that was not true, because how did those wealthy arrive at such a conspicuous consumption in China? Did they? Who could afford them? Well, we know from 1700 to 1800, the Chinese population drastically increased from 150 million to 300 million people. Let's assume there's 1% of a Chinese elite of the entire population. So by 1800, for 300 million Chinese people, there are 3 million Chinese elites. Okay? We're talking about 3 million Chinese local elites. Peasants definitely cannot afford this, right? So for 3 million Chinese elites, at least a couple of thousands of them would well tap into this very wealthy global trade network. All right? We know that because they sell timbers nationwide. There are very wealthy salt merchants doing things in China. We also know they are commercial networks organized to export silk, porcelain, and tea. So the national trade networks exist, and they were well connected to the global trade. We know this, and we know there are very rich people who could afford this kind of things or tap into that network. How expensive were they? Right? They were as expensive as a rare book edition. A rare book costs about 10 taels of silver, which is roughly about 6 months of food for a peasant family, right? And for this kind of stuff, to buy a copy of a rare book and a bowl of bird's nest soup, similar things. For a lot of families, they could afford it, especially the family in Holomong. So, the thing is, they were not just food, exotic luxuries, they were also part of the status dynamics. And we tap into all kind of Japanese scholarship. They were very keen about the status dynamics in Qing China. And this is the basic things about how they compete and outmaneuver each other is the status dynamics, right? The way they dress, the way they eat, the way they perform any kind of rituals, everything is tapped into the status dynamics of the wealthy officials and scholars. So, that's it. I'm going to give you a very simple, straightforward message. The luxury consumption was the essence of global trade in the age of silver. We know this. This is well known, well studied. But historians have overlooked what China wanted in a global network for so many years, for at least 100 years. If we put that back into the global trade, it will create a very different picture for us. All right, I'm going to stop here. Thank you. And I look forward to hear your comments.
I mean, this is very fascinating. So, I do not know too much about this luxury food, except the Chinese general thing. But I think your big point is really about historiography. So how to put the Chinese element, the Chinese point into this concept of global history, for you is global trade history. So are you, what are your historiographic tools in order to putting these Chinese luxury items into this analysis or narratives of global trade? Rather than just say that they are luxury and Chinese want it. So, but how do you make it into this historiographic project?
Thank you, Joseph. So that is indeed the heart of my book project. So for many, many years, and especially Santa Cruz, people are saying, oh, we're going to do ocean center. No, because for a long time, historians have focused on land, right? You look at Eurasia, you look at America. You don't, in your historical narrative, you don't talk about ocean. When you talk about ocean, you only talk about the trade routes. So the idea is, how do you do ocean center history? That is not about Japan, not about China, not about Philippines, right? So my argument is that the entire East Asian water was empty ever since the 16th century. It was empty because the two major powers, China and Japan, retreated from ocean. So ocean becomes empty for trade and piracy. And that is precisely why when Europeans sail into both South Asia, Indian Ocean, and Southeast Asia, they encounter no armed resistance whatsoever. The Dutch East Indian Company could slaughter the entire island of indigenous people without any problem. They only sent a few hundred people there, and they slaughtered the entire island, right? That's not the case in the 20th century. Empire of Japan occupied most of Southeast Asia. Now China is claiming the South China Sea, and everybody was very mad about that. So when these two powers were showing their presence in the ocean, we all know that. But what people did not think of is they retreated from ocean from 16th all the way to 19th century, and therefore let the entire East Asian waters empty. So for that, we now have the global trade stories. We need to think about what kind of a trade that go into China and the volume. I'm looking at tax records and all kinds of stuff. The volume that go into China. So if you compare the trade volume, luxury goods, of all these four things we talk about today, with the trade that Europeans extracted from Southeast Asia, it was, my suspicion is, was not that far off. They're very similar. But for a long time, we have only talking about East Asian waters and European spice trade, and ignore entirely the other side with the similar scales of exotic luxury foods on the East Asian side. So I think that's a very important side of the story we need to tell in order to complete this ocean center story about the East Asian waters. So that's really the idea that I have for my book.
So actually, I have some questions.
Okay.
Well, thank you for a fascinating talk, and I have several questions. First, could you say more about the choice of these four luxury goods? Like, why these four things? Like, there are maybe others, like we can see tiger bones, like ginseng.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, sort of that says. So, and the second, could you say more about how, like, do you have any like archives to, like in the 70s or maybe 80s to talk about the consumption of these luxury goods?
Thank you. Well, the tiger bones, snakes, and other exotics stuff that's considered by the Benzhao traditions that has healing powers. The problem with a tiger is that it's, the supply is even more uncertain, and it's very, very small amount. The scale is very small. Okay. Jonathan Schlesinger already wrote a book about picking mushrooms in mangoes, ginseng, and all the stuff, different small environmental commodities from Mango and Manchuria. The problem with all the commodities he talks about, the amount is really minuscule. The scale is so small in comparison with these four. Okay, so the ginseng was hard, right? But it was quickly. The Qing state initiated a policy for people to grow ginseng. And what most historians do not know is after 1776, American Revolution, and the American merchants wants to compete with the British Empire, they were thinking about what stuff they can sell to China. They immediately thought of ginseng. That was the beginning of Wisconsin ginseng, and they sailed to Canton. At that time, China was under what most Europeans would call the Canton system, because the Qing China only allowed one port for Europeans to trade, and Americans came and started trading ginseng in China. So ginseng has a very large supply, okay? So was the shark fins, so was the bird's nest. So the reason I picked this four commodity is because I think, I haven't done all the research yet, I think their scale could match the European trade. The scale could be that big. The reason, of course, is the scale today is still huge, all right? For all four commodities, they are huge today. So you trace back to 18th century, the scale could match the European spice trade. And the amount of a trade and money changing hands could be quite significant, but that had been overlooked by so many people so long. So that's why I picked this four, primarily because of scale. Yeah. And you also asked me about sources, right? The sources are everywhere, just people don't look. Really, 户部则例, that is like, it has been digitized, okay? So all these bureaucratic documents, people don't look. If you look at them, they're everywhere. So that's another interesting thing. You don't need to go to archive to study this. You can just go to the database, you search ginseng or yanguo, that's bird's nest, right? Or haisen, that's sea cucumber. Came up like hundreds of items from all different kind of literatures. I think this is not a matter of we cannot find archival resources. This is a matter of perspectives. We don't have that perspective to look into it. So that's the problem, I think.
So I have a question from the virtual audience.
Okay.
Is the Chinese trade in these luxury items really global? Your map showed the producing areas were all in East and Southeast Asia.
Okay. So the entire trade networks were global, for sure, we know that, right? And we traced the route of silver. And silver, ever since the discovery of Americas for the Iberian empires, both Spanish and Portuguese, they mined silver and shipped the silver to China because that's the currency the Chinese want to export tea, porcelain, silk, and then that kind of stuff they can buy spices in Southeast Asia. So the entire global trade networks existed for sure, right? What we don't know is how did East Asian states, okay, like Japan from Nagasaki or China from the Canton, from the beginning, at the beginning you can see the trade through the lower Yangtze Valley to Nagasaki But later in the 18th century, you see the Canton trade flourished. And that is tap into the global trade networks. Okay, how did Chinese merchants use the global trade networks to import all these 4 luxury goods? That's my question. Okay, so Chinese did not create this trade networks for themselves. They tap into the existing trade networks created by Europeans to do that. So what I'm arguing is very simple. In this global trade networks, we forgot the Chinese story. And that is my argument.
Oh, thank you, Professor. I'm just wondering if you could talk a little bit more about digital humanities and its connection to this project. And the reason I bring it up is because so I was trying to do a project on recovering the kind of the China junk trade in Southeast Asia using a variety of the records from the Dutch colonies and trying to use some of the stuff that has been compiled, which is very useful for creating an archive, but also really limited in what it can tell us as an archival source, because it's usually outgoing to the East India Company, and so we have a lot of we are missing the piece of which ships are going to Hong Kong, to Xiamen, all those port cities. We have access to records in the East India Company, but then trying to get that, even though we know kind of inferentially that it's a large volume. And so I'm wondering if you, because one of the ways that I've thought about it is of using different types of techniques that have been used to recover slave trade and Atlantic work, and I'm wondering if you're trying to bring some digital humanities efforts in order to try to recover some of this, like the material of the shipping networks.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that's the traditional method, of course, is to trace the commercial records and the ship records, right? So my colleague at UC Santa Cruz, he did a database on all the ship records of a transatlantic slave trade. So that's a very, very fruitful approach, for sure. The question, the reason why people ignore the China side story for so long is because the junk trade you mentioned did not keep very detailed the ship records in and out of China. Primarily because of what I said, that the Chinese state retreated from the East Asian waters. So what I do is to look at text record. So if you look at the 户部折例, which is the Ministry of Revenues, right? They, I'm sure some people have used this, but not extensively, at least not in North America. I look at especially luxury items. So from the north, they would come in from Shanghai-guan, the Shanghai Pass, or Juyongguan, right? And they would enter, there's 9 gates in Beijing. So one of the gates, Chongwenmen, is where all the commerce enter, and that's where they charge tax. And you can see ginseng come in there, and, some mundane items too, but ginseng is very expensive. You can see the tax is very high. Or you can see the text in Zhejiang records. The Hubu, they will say, oh, yeah, we got a lot of shark fins from south. We got a lot of those things. Then, because they are luxury items, and therefore they were shipped around China. Okay, they did not just exist in that specific spot. And if you trace the tax record, you can see how widely it was distributed and how much tax it was charged. So you can use that method to trace the trade volume of it. That's my initial approach, and I'll see how it turns out and let you know. As for digital humanities, I'm interested in text mining. So what we know is now the erudition, the Ai Rusheng database from Beijing is huge, right? And that database changes what we do here in North America. And I think Harvard had a problem with them because Harvard downloaded everything and Iruseng sued them, and Harvard countersued Iruseng, and then Harvard won. So now Iruseng put in all kind of limitations. You cannot download everything. You can download only like certain pages per day. That created a lot of problems for me to do data mining. But I could successfully get into Iruseng using the Python codes, and I could automate a lot of a process, makes the whole thing easier for me. So if you're interested, we can definitely talk later about text mining and how large language model can help us do that.
I have another question. I'm sorry if there's somebody before me. Thank you for the fascinating presentation. My question is, were any of these 4 luxurious foods involved in the tributary system in some way? For instance, during the Qing period, or were they primarily harvested and imported by traders?
The ginseng was, the beginning of the ginseng story was primarily for banners. So the banner armies has monopoly to harvest and trade ginseng. And therefore the Qing state have nearly entire control of the ginseng trade, right? And therefore taxes are very, very promising and good, stable sources of revenue for the Qing state. We know that the earliest record we could find for bird's nests could be dated in the 9th century, the Song dynasty. And the other one is, let me just give you one example. The other thing is wine, okay? So wine, the alcohol fermented from grapes, right? Because most hard liquors and alcohols in China were fermented from grains, not grapes. But in the Tang Dynasty, we have a poem that mentions wine, right? And we know the mention of the wine in the Tang poetry comes from Central Asia. But also in the Ben Cao Gangmu, in the Ben Cao tradition, they talked about how wine, the grape from Central Asia, was very sour, and the way you ferment the grapes into wine was very difficult. And sometimes the wine can be poisonous and taste very bad, right? So despite the fact that we have the earliest record of wine from 6th century, but it was never widely consumed or popular at all in China for all these centuries down to 17th centuries. By 17th century, we know that, and by 18th century, we know Kangxi loves wine. The missionaries imported some wine, and Kangxi was like, this is good stuff. Keep it coming. So from that time onward, all the way through 18th century, wine steadily imported through the Canton system. So, and that definitely, the quality is way better than the Central Asian wine. So throughout the entire 18th century, the imperial household consumed wines a lot, but the scale is still not big, all right? So tributary does carry tributary trade, right? And it comes like every 3 years, every 2 years. But that does not always guarantee that kind of a scale to meet the demand for luxury households in China. And therefore, shark fins, bird's nests, and the sea cucumbers all been handled by mostly merchants. And we know that because they were taxed, right? They taxed, and merchants have to bring stuff into China. They were taxed. And from that, we know most of them were done by merchants with large scales, different from like wine or small scale luxury commodities.
Hello, I had a follow-up questions about the choice about those 4 luxury luxury foods. Can you say something more about the bird's nest, about its role in the global trade? Because like the ginseng, you mentioned that how Americans sell the ginseng to China, and I'm wondering if there is something similar happened in bird's nest.
Okay,
Thank you.
so out of these 4 luxury goods, only ginseng became internationally known, primarily because Pierre Jadot, the French missionaries, who was sent to the Chinese-Russian border to do a survey, on his way there, his Manchu friend gave him ginseng. He was fascinated, so he sent a report back to Paris, and it was translated and published in English in Philosophical Transaction next year. And that also report was taken up by another French missionaries in Canada. And they were also fascinated by these root things. And they found something similar in Virginia. So Wisconsin ginseng, we now know, if you compare genetics, slightly different from the Korean ginseng, but they look very similar, taste very similar, and they are also very similar species. So, because of these early modern connections, ginseng was never considered disgusting. And therefore, internationally widely known, and Americans understood the business opportunity. This is a great thing to sell to Chinese, right? But the bird's nest, if you look at the Protestant missionary reports since the Opium War, like from 1850s and 1860s, you see tons of literature demonizing Chinese because they eat bird's nest soup. Okay, so that was the thing. So that food was not culturally accepted by the West at all. Okay, so the typical Chinese image in the missionary literature is the guy with a cube who's carrying a bird's nest and eating this disgusting food. That's Chinese in the South. And partly because of this kind of demonization, you really don't have any kind of, even today, I don't think people would love. I ask my students, and they never had it, never heard of it. But if you ask I ask my students about caviar. Oh, I had it before, family dinner, we had the caviar. But never, sea cucumber, for example. Sea cucumber is another thing that the Japanese heavily involved now in harvesting and selling sea cucumbers. And there's only one market in the world. That's China. Shark fin soup, the same story, right? So because this 3 luxury commodity was never culturally accepted by the West, the consumption was limited in East Asia.
I dare to ask this question. Thank you so much for such a fascinating talk. And this really is more of an Epicurean kind of question. It has to do with shark fin. What is it about shark fin? And in the sense that, there are other fin fish that could create a similar broth, and they're, and this might dive into what might be imitation versions.
That's
and
right.
How,
imitation exists.
how that hits the market, and different ways. I haven't gone to enough weddings to appreciate the real thing, but maybe you could tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So the reason they are substitute or mark ones is because the demand is very high in China, right? And they couldn't have enough shark fins to meet that demand. So the first question is why shark fins? Why not other fish, right? So my suspicion, I don't have some definitive answer for you. My suspicion is that because there are 2,000 species of sharks down in South China Sea, they're abundant supply. And it's easy. And even today shark fins were harvested by Indonesians. They you know, a lot of environmentalists would say, you know, they just cut off the shark fins and then put the sharks back. That's not true. The Indonesians, they harvest, they capture the sharks, right? They use everything, including the shark teeth, right? So, but the shark fins was a major export now from Indonesia to China. I had it once. I have to say it tastes pretty good. Yeah. Hong Kong. Hong Kong is the place that imports enormous amount of shark fins. They love shark fins. Yeah. So because it was, you know, widely cherished as very important Chinese delicacy, it was they developed all kinds of substitutes, which is looked down upon by Chinese, right? Oh, that's not authentic. That's not good enough. So the demand would never, well, had not waned for a long time, actually.
Anyway, this is really fascinating. So I want to ask you a little bit off the question. Being the die-hard humanist as I am, so do you have any reasons for the aesthetics or the pleasures of eating these for good? Because they're luxury, then besides it's good for health, rare, then those are sociological, physical.
That's right.
But then is there a kind of aesthetic or imaginary reason that drive this desire?
Yeah. Well, out of these four, right, we know that, okay, I've seen Kangxi Emperor wrote something on his memorial. And Kangxi would say something like, oh, you Chinese, you are so obsessed by ginseng. That's actually not true. So Kangxi was, you can see, number one, Kangxi is not Chinese, right? He would condemn the Chinese people for eating ginseng obsessively. But we, Manchus, we don't do this, right? So you can see that. But you can also see, on the other hand, the Chinese really obsessed by ginseng. They have all kinds of ridiculous story, right? The most ridiculous one is that if you're about to die, if you feed you some ginseng soup, that would keep you alive for another hour or something. So that is there, right? So that is very important, right? How do you, for example, you're dying and you have some important words to say. Ginseng is the magical formula there. He can keep you alive for another hour. You can say what you want to say, right? And the other thing, the other expensive thing is, the most expensive thing among these four is the bird's nest. And I don't know why. You know, there's a lot of stories, and there's a gender dimension to it. There's a lot of stories about how bird's nest can help nourish a woman. And therefore, in a very wealthy household, you need to, and because all these rich people believe the bird's nest would nourish women to such a high degree, they imagine all kinds of taste and all kinds of stuff the bird's nest, a bowl of bird's nest soup would tell you, bring you. And when the servant carry that into your mansion, your house, and serve you that bowl of soup, that has become the entire cultural milieu that shows that you are rich. You have taste. So another thing is, of course, taste, right? So you have very, very high and important taste. You can tell how delicious and sweet the bird's nest soup is. So that's just, you know, anecdotal sort of evidence that I have now. We can dive into this more to find out exactly, you know, why that taste is so great and you resonate with other things, including music. So how that could help and elevate the taste, right? So the taste is really the part of the social dynamics and status dynamics, right? So if I show you I have a higher taste than you, right, I definitely are more important than you. So I think the taste and status dynamics go hand in hand in that. And all this will also play into that. But we need to do more research on this.
Yeah, because I can tell you, from my own personal experience, I haven't got such things cucumber. And that is a recipe of how you can control the taste, the taste. There's a pleasure of eating it. So I suspect there's one way to drive luxury good because it's so versatile and it really shows your skill of
Yeah.
cooking.
Yeah. Somebody took me out to dinner in Nanjing. They order a dish of sea cucumber.
Yeah.
It cost 1,000 RMB. It's so expensive. It's crazy. And
That's okay. Yeah, okay.
anyway, thank you.
Are there any modern scientific studies related to the health benefits? I know you can buy shark cartilage as a supplement now. Ginseng, of course, is widely used everywhere. But bird's nests and sea cucumbers?
Exactly. So there are, Chinese medicine has become nationalized, right? So I have a friend in Taiwan who's also a microbiologist who studies these sort of things. So the issues, and so on the one hand, I would argue that bird's nest really, the content of its protein is roughly equal to one egg, right? And we have not found any significant ingredients in that kind of saliva protein to prove that it has tremendous medical power. What we do now is for ginseng. For ginseng and a mushroom called in Chinese 灵芝, but in American they call it reishi, R-E-I-S-H-I. I'm taking it now. Because it has, they believe that it will relax you, reduce your anxiety, and help you sleep. So, the traditional Chinese medicine project now are trying to research and prove different kind of extraction and ingredients of ginseng and reishi, for example, to show that they have certain kind of health benefits. But for sea cucumber and shark fins, not really.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, I'm sure we have lots more questions, delicious ones to ask. But it's time, so some people have to go to class, like myself, I have to go. Yeah. So let's give another big applause for him, Professor Hu, and then
Thank you.
and thank
Thank
you
you.
for coming.